All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome in to Pucks with Haggs, the relaunch. Take two, 2.0. Bringing back a hockey podcast you may already know about. Joe Haggerty, Boston Hockey Now, Hockey Scribe, here to talk NHL, here to talk Bruins, and here to talk about what the hell went on with the Bruins in the last game, Game 2 versus the Florida Panthers. The podcast is powered by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network. Make sure to go sign up, FanDuel.com/Boston. Get your bonus now. Joe, let's just start with what went wrong. I think there's weird panic in Bruins Nation right now, which is maybe a little bit undue, right? It's not a panic moment, but I think when a team is virtually invincible all year long and you watch them look so vincible, so vulnerable for a game and have so many things that go for them, they've been reliable all year, fail, which is the goaltending, the solid decor, the depth of their lines, their ability to generate offense up and down the lineup, and create pressure on the goaltender, and then their fortitude, being able to bounce back from things, have strong third periods. Almost every one of those things didn't work last night.
Yeah, let's call it a triumphant return for the Pucks with Haggs podcast, but not a very triumphant showing in Game 2 for the Boston Bruins. And honestly, the first two games of this series, even though the Bruins won Game 1, I feel like we're seeing some of the same things and some of these patterns developing. One of which is that clearly the Bruins, even though they said they were trying to play at playoff level and intensity in the last month of the regular season to get ready for the playoffs, I think it was a shock to the system when they got there and they started playing a Florida Panthers team that's been playing playoff hockey essentially from the NHL All-Star break and had to fight for their lives to get in. But on top of that, I think you're seeing the Boston Bruins are making some very uncharacteristic mistakes and having some things happen that didn't happen all year. And I think it's because of the upped speed, the upped physicality, the upped intensity that the Florida Panthers are bringing, specifically when they attack the Bruins defensemen. I think that's the biggest story that we've seen in the first two games of this series, is that guys like Dmitry Orlov and Hampus Lindholm and Brandon Carlo and even Charlie McAvoy in Game 2 was a -3 and gave it up on a pivotal goal in the third period that gave the Panthers a 4-2 lead. They are all wilting under the pressure. They're starting to hear the footsteps of the forecheckers coming to hit them, and they're giving up pucks too early, throwing them to places they don't want to, namely the middle of the ice in the defensive zone by the blue line. And the Panthers are just licking their chops and coming in, and it's creating offensive opportunities. 15 giveaways in Game 2 by the Boston Bruins. I think that's the most that they had all year or close to it. A couple of them led directly to goals. Yep. And I think you're seeing, a guy like Lindholm, who looked like King Kong during the regular season, as soon as he starts to get hit a little bit, and, maybe in the back of his mind, he's got what was a Game 2 last year against the Hurricanes when he got smoked and knocked out of that series with a big hit. Maybe that's somewhere in the back of his mind. I don't know. But you're seeing a bunch of players, specifically the defensemen, that looked one way during the regular season, look another in the playoffs. That's a big-time concern. I don't think it can't be reversed. I certainly think the Bruins defensemen are better than they've shown thus far, but they need to adjust to what they're seeing now and speed up their decision-making, speed up the way they're moving the puck up the ice, and maybe change some of the breakouts a little bit, because they need to make an adjustment from what they did in the first two games, no question.
But we saw it, so that they need to do it, but is it surprising? Because again, if you stack this team up versus past Bruins teams, even ones that had either won a cup or gone all the way to the cup, they seem to not have some of the issues even some of those other very successful teams that had, because they had so much depth. You finally did address blue line depth where you felt pretty good. I mean, Grzelcyk has been a scratch, and he was a top pairing defenseman and a top 4 defenseman on this team for the last couple of years, and he's odd man out. I mean, you add Dmitry Orlov here at the trade deadline. You have two top 10 NHL defensemen in Lindholm and McAvoy. This was not supposed to happen to this group. That's what's strange to me, is you say they're hearing footsteps, but are you surprised that they are?
To a degree, but we're not talking about guys in Dmitry Orlov or Hampus Lindholm that are these famed playoff studs that have really established
No.
themselves. You know,
No.
this is when they have to prove themselves as well. The regular season and the playoffs are two different animals, and I think that's
Totally.
what you're seeing with some of these players now is they have to adjust and they have to figure out how to have the same success they had in the regular season in the playoffs when guys are flying like their lives depend on it, skating in and hitting you, not like they are when it's a little more polite and a little slower during the regular season. And I think that's part of it. But like series, playoffs, it's all adjustments too. I mean, people forget in 2011 when they won the Stanley Cup, it took them a couple of games to figure out that they had to put Dennis Seidenberg and Zdeno Chara as a pairing together.
And you're playing them like 30 minutes a game.
Right.
You know, I mean, they leaned on those guys.
And they figured that out as the series went along and came up with the solution. Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to in the playoffs. And to your point, I think when you've seen the speed that the Florida Panthers are attacking them with, and you see some of the Bruins defensemen, namely Lindholm, Orlov, guys like that, but even Derek Forbort, Brandon Carlo, they all look slow. And a lot of them are bigger physical guys, so they are going to look slower. I think that's where you have to really seriously think about injecting Matt Grzelcyk into this series. And I'd be surprised if he doesn't play Game 3 because he's a much faster skater. He's a much better puck mover. That's his job, is to skate with a guy like Brandon Carlo, who's there to kill penalties, to, you know, hack and whack people in front of the net and really be a warrior in the defensive zone. He needs to be paired with a guy like Matt Grzelcyk that's going to be the greyhound that's flying the puck up the ice and skating through all these guys and avoiding this heavy forecheck and avoiding these guys flying at him because he can outskate them and he has great ways of escaping the defensive zone and breaking the puck out. And I think that's where you need to bring him into this series now because I think it's screaming for it after Game 2. Certainly, I thought that after Game 1. I thought they were having a real difficult time, even though they won, getting through the Florida forecheck, and it was even worse in Game 2, really pronounced, especially in the third period when things started falling apart. So I think you are going to see a guy like that injected into the series, and I think it's the perfect time to use him. And look, let's face it. I understand to a degree why Grzelcyk is a scratch too, because if he plays from Game 1 throughout the postseason, he's never going to make it and stay healthy. We've seen that over the years. That at some point he gets nailed in one of these playoff series because he's a smaller guy. He's 5'8", 170 pounds, and he gets taken out. And in years past, the Bruins didn't have enough depth, and once they lost him to injury, they were in deep trouble. And maybe that'll even happen in the future because some of these guys are struggling to move the puck. But I think right now is the perfect time to bring him in, see if he can change the dynamic of the series as far as the forecheck goes, really help that Bruins defenseman core get the puck out of the zone and sort of change the way this series, the tenor of the series in the first couple of games. You know, I never would have thought before the series started that Matt Grzelcyk is an important sort of key piece or could be a key figure, but I think given the way it's played out in the first couple of games, he could be.
Yeah, it's a pick your poison thing though, where you know he can obviously skate out with the puck, but you are worried about him getting beat up, and you know Florida's got the last change, and they can really target pairings depending on how you kind of set it up, and make it harder for someone like that. But again, I do think that it's been such a clear. I almost think they overthought it even entering the series, and I think it was pretty clear after the first game what they should have done, and they still stuck with Forbort, but you could tell there wasn't that much confidence there because he played 14 minutes, which was the low among all defensemen. He wasn't even that prevalent on the penalty kill, which is another thing that he's known for. So you could tell as the game went on, Montgomery almost knew right there. I don't like him out there right now. I'm not liking what I'm getting out of this. That seems like an obvious change up. The rest is, and again, I know he spoke today. Yesterday, Montgomery alluded to changes. That he might have to seriously consider some. And we think Grzelcyk is an automatic one, and it's an easy one to slot in there in place of Forbort. No big deal. It's whether there's going to be more global changes. But it starts with Patrice Bergeron. I'm going to get into that first before we get into other changes. Now, he skated again on Thursday morning by himself. He skated on Wednesday by himself. I know this is the playoffs and timetables change, but as we saw with Taylor Hall and Foligno when they were coming back from injury, they skated by themselves for a week or so. Then they wore red contact jerseys for a couple of weeks.
Usually about a 10-day window from the time you start skating on your own to when you can come back.
in the normal world.
Right.
Now it's the playoffs and the timetable could be accelerated, but the fact that he's only skating on his own right now really starts to make you think you're probably going to be without him for the entire series, or maybe you get him back late, or maybe you rush it in a dire situation if you're facing elimination and say we got to go. So
Yeah.
I think the hope was to get him fully healthy, that they were going to try to get the whole series the way it's looking now.
Yep.
So let's just do you kind of agree with that assessment?
Well, I think in the playoffs that it changes a little where a guy can go from skating on his own to back in the lineup pretty quickly. It can be accelerated, as you said, depending on the circumstances. So would I bet on him playing in Game 3? Probably not, just given where he is right now. If they go down 2-1 in this series, could he be an option to go down to Florida and play in Game 4? Certainly. I think, you know, in the perfect world, I think what the Bruins were hoping was they were going to win last night, and then you can kind of hold them out for the entire first round if you've really got a stranglehold over the Panthers, and you think you're going to coast in 4 or 5 games to a series win, and just give them that extra time to heal and get back towards 100%, then great. But I think as the series plays out, if things don't change, if they find out they really need him, it is going to get accelerated and he would come back. But if I were a betting man, if I were betting on FanDuel right now, I would probably not be betting for Patrice Bergeron to be playing in Game 3.
No, not Game 3. And again, I really do think the way it's being set up right now is that he's still optimally a little bit away.
The bigger question, Zannis, for me in this whole thing is, you know, when are we going to really go after the Bruins for allowing this to happen, where he played in Game 82 in Montreal that was meaningless? And, you know, I understand he wanted to play because his friends and family were there. It's the last game he's probably ever going to play at the Bell Center. You know, it was very meaningful for him personally, and I get all that. Right. And I think he, you know, from what I can gather, he really wanted to play, and that was a consideration. And you know, who's going to say no to Patrice Bergeron when he feels strongly about something like that? But this probably is one of those situations where I think the Bruins should have put their foots down a little more firmly and said, you know what, Patrice, we're going to sit this one out and get ready for the postseason, and you know, you're not going to play. And, you know, I can understand both why they had reasoning. You know, they were going to have a few days off. They wanted to make sure that everybody was up to game speed when they went out and played. And there was some logic behind playing more of their regulars than not in that last game. But 37-year-old captain that, you know, is banged up after a full season, that you want as good as he can be going into the playoffs, that's not going to be affected one way or the other if he sits for 5, 6, 7 days without a game before going into the playoffs. You really hope, as somebody that wants to see Patrice Bergeron get a chance to really be at his best in what could be his last playoff for the Boston Bruins, that he gets that chance, and that playing in that Game 82 that didn't matter one bit one way or the other doesn't end up impacting the Bruins and impacting this like a dream record NHL season that they had before it even really gets started. That would be a really sad end to this entire season and situation if that's the way it plays out. And you just hope that doesn't happen as a hockey fan.
Yeah, that would be a real bummer, Joe. It's again, the Bergeron thing, I think you have to look at it as a kind of equal responsibility. I do agree. It makes a lot of sense what he wanted to do. And you're just, probably Montgomery's thinking like, okay, but like, please. And then, what bugs me a little bit is some of the subterfuge or the obfuscation here after the fact. Lifted for precautionary reasons, leaning on the illness, reluctant to say it was an injury. That's kind of like, I think they were hoping it would resolve itself before it became an issue and before people would start pointing fingers.
Yeah, before they would start getting second guessed. There's no doubt about it.
Again,
and it's funny, when it first originally happened and he was lifted after the first period and, it said upper body precautionary, people are like, it's no big deal. He just wanted to come out and go hang out with his family and friends who were there. And, I'm sure he just wanted to come out of the game. I was thinking to myself, and I really didn't go off on Twitter at the time when people were saying that, but I'm like, I've known this guy for 20 years. I know Patrice Bergeron pretty well. He is not the kind of guy that's going to show up, wave his hand, do a little pageant wave at the Bell Center, play a period, and then leave his teammates out there to play the final 40 minutes without him and fend for themselves. That is not the kind of player he is. That is not the kind of leader he is. As soon as he left that game after the first period, I said, that's not good. Like, that's trouble, because he would never do that. Have it designed, scripted out. I'm going to play one period and then bolt after that and watch the rest of the game from the ninth floor or the catwalk or whatever they have up there at the Bell Center. He wouldn't do that, and at that point, it kind of raised my eyebrows to this might be trouble. But I think you're right. When it got mixed in with players getting sick, it gave them cover for a few days. If he missed one game, to kind of say, it was sickness and not really get questioned about it. Now, as it goes on, the second-guessing factor goes up and gets elevated, and rightfully so. I think it's when it's all said and done, if it impacts this playoff run, it absolutely should be second-guessed in a huge way.
In every way, and Bergeron, and trying to press it himself, if that were in fact the case, or Montgomery allowing it. But you're right. I mean, even the way Montgomery answered the question, finally coming clean prior in the pregame media availability prior to Game 2, wouldn't even say injury, just said it's not an illness. So they're trying so hard to not say the guy's hurt, and who knows what it is, but upper body could be a lot of different things. And what you're worried about is not only that Bergeron's return, is delayed or he might not be able to play soon. It's that when he comes back, we've seen this guy play an entire postseason with a collapsed lung, okay? Or not the entire postseason. He
played one Stanley Cup final game with it, which is more than good enough for me.
We've seen this guy play hurt. How many times, and especially some of these Bruins players, these forwards, who are not afraid of physicality, but might not necessarily have the build for it. How many of these, after long playoff runs, you find 6, 7 guys, 8 guys all going under the knife with stuff that probably would have knocked them out for a month or so in the regular season that they just played through? What you're worried about is not only whether he can return in time to help you in a series that now is not in the bag, but are you getting a reduced version of him coming back if he's battling something that's going to nag and not ever be right? You've just really handicapped yourself by, taking your best player and forcing him to play at 70, 80, whatever percent.
Yeah, and that's what happened in 2019 with David Pastrnak, right? When he fell down and injured his thumb. And then when he came back, he wasn't quite the same guy in the playoffs. He was hesitant to shoot, missing with the one-timer, clearly the hand and the thumb were bothering him in the postseason, and they end up losing in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. And you say to yourself, hypothetically, could 100% David Pastrnak with no issues have been a difference in them winning rather than losing when it got to a Game 7? And there's a lot of other factors involved, and you could blame the 2015 NHL draft for not providing them impact players that could have helped him in that situation as well. There was a lot of things at play there for them losing when it seemed like the way the Red Sea parted for them to win that cup and take care of the Blues. But you're right. It's the same kind of situation where you wonder when he does come back what kind of shape he's going to be in, and if he's going to be able to get back to 100%, or if this is something that's going to nag him and be something that's kind of chronic throughout this postseason. You certainly hope not. But just watching the games, obviously guy's a 30-goal scorer, 60 to 70 points, Selke winner. There's a lot of different places you miss him. But even just the simple stuff with the face-offs, they're losing. David Krejci's losing a ton of face-offs. In general, they've been under 50% in the face-off dot for the first couple of games, where he's a dominant force. And he could lock up with a guy like Sasha Barkov and really win his share of faceoffs, and they haven't been able to do that. He plays the bumper spot on the power play, which is a hugely important position. They've had Jake DeBrusk there. They've had other players there. Jake DeBrusk on the power play had a bunch of turnovers last night, did not play well while being thrust into that sort of position. And I think there's a lot of places that are subtle that you might not obviously think they miss Patrice Bergeron here, but it's very clear watching them that they do miss him in those kind of spots, and it all starts to add up for a while because he's such a valuable player. And, that's where the need is for him to come back and help in all these different areas. And, do the Bruins fall apart as much as they do in the third period last night when things aren't going well if Patrice Bergeron's there as the calming influence on the bench? And, does he let it get to a point where everybody's trying to do it on their own and sort of being a little selfish about it in the third period and kind of panicking a little bit instead of sticking with it like they have all the year when he's been there? So, there's a lot of different things at play here, but the bottom line is hugely valuable guy that they need to be close to 100% if they're going to win the cup. And you just have to sort of cross your fingers if you're a Bruins fan and hope he gets there at this point with so much vagueness and, gray area as to what's going on right now.
Yeah, and it is a thing that will be talked about if worst case scenario happens and he doesn't return and they don't make it out. A historically bad decision. It's not there yet. It is interesting just in terms of the way,
Yes.
and everyone will be like, shut up, you guys are being alarmists. It's not that. It's just how you process things. There is a faction of sports fans out there that just want to hold their blankie and say everything's going to be all right. And of course everyone wants everything to be all right, but this is a concern until we see it's no longer a concern. So right now, not having Bergeron, not having him being able to skate with his teammates, appearing like he is days, if not longer, away from returning in a series that now looks like you desperately need him, and you're going to need everything you have to be able to get through because you have been outplayed for the better part of 2 games. Yep. It's not great right now. It's not over. It's not dire. The sky's not falling, but it could be soon. So just mentally prepare yourself.
We're just greasing the skids for Bruins breakup day right now, Zannis. That's all. That's perfectly fine.
The Bruins have plenty of talent, plenty of depth to be able to get through this team without Bergeron, but right now it's a problem.
Well, I think last night was the first game that they've lost without Bergeron all season. They were undefeated, I believe, going into that game. Yep. So that will you give them a mulligan on game 2, but to your point, like I think the Panthers have been better than the Bruins in the balance of the series so far, and that clearly needs to change.
So we talked about change. Jim Montgomery promised some change. We mentioned Grzelcyk. We're going to get into that in just a minute. We got to tell you about FanDuel. We told you a little bit about it at the top, but you want to get in on the action now. As we said, you've got NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, and for those baseball people out there, and Joe Haggerty used to be a baseball guy himself. Hacks with Haggs, he does it all. FanDuel is, in addition to being the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network, also the official partner of Major League Baseball, and so you have it all right now. We're deep into the start of the regular season here, and if you want to get in on that action, go for it. Again, super easy to download app, and if you do it, FanDuel.com/Boston. This special offer is still here. It's still available to be able to get $200 in bonus bets when you make a $5 real money wager. That's all you have to do. Deposit 10, bet 5, get 200 in bonus bets, which you can use at any time, and just kind of free money to play with and gamble. Again, these are bonus bets, not actual dollars. Make sure you check it out. FanDuel.com/Boston. Go in, cash in on that deal right now. Joe, let's get back to it. Well, I'll ask you right now. You're a betting man. You're still taking the Bruins in this series, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I do think there's going to be some adjustments. I do think Grzelcyk's probably going to be in there for Game 3. I do think Patrice Bergeron, if the series wears on, is going to return at some point and be a factor when he does come back. So, and look, we have not seen even close to what the Bruins are and what they've been all year in the first couple of games. And I think you have to have a little faith in them that they are going to get back to what their norm and their standard was the entire year prior to this point. Like I think they just and this was the worry, and I mentioned this at the top, and this is the worry going into this, is that they were so far ahead of everybody else, setting records, doing all kinds of other things that they didn't have to face the furious competition and have their lives on the line hockey-wise, like the Panthers did for the last couple of months of the season. And I think that's shown in the level of intensity, speed, and physicality that the two teams are playing with in the first couple of games. And I think the Bruins, now with having lost that game at home, having Ryan Lomberg trying to choke out Trent Frederick on the ice in the middle of a pile at the end of the third period, having Matthew Tkachuk, chirping Thomas Noshik, all kinds of stuff about his family from what I saw in the video, like having all these nasty things happening that the Panthers are doing to the Boston Bruins now that like screams playoff hockey, like they're in it to win it and they're playing for keeps. I think now is the time when the Bruins wake up and finally figure that out after this wake-up call of a game too. So I do think things are going to turn when it goes down to Florida, and we're going to see a different Boston Bruins team. Just like, they need to react, but to some of the stuff that was happening at the end of that game too, when they were clearly angry after the game was over. You saw Trent Frederick visibly angry. Clearly, Charlie McAvoy was pissed off in that locker room as well. There were a bunch of Bruins players that were mad about the way things went down at the end of that game, and now they need to respond to that going forward.
Yeah, and I tweeted it. I saw it. I did not use the language in my tweet that Frederick used, but it was along the lines of, I'm going to look for me next game. It's the train is coming.
Lomberg's about 5'9", 175 pounds, so I think Frederick's going to make a point to find him. I mean, Lomberg is turning into a enemy, certainly a Boston sports, Boston Bruins fan enemy, public enemy number one kind of guy. I thought it was going to be Matthew Tkachuk, who was doing his thing as well. But Lomberg had a couple of penalties last night, really sneaky dirty, the stuff that he does on the ice. And, going for the chokehold on Frederick at the end there, I think that cinches it that he's going to become a villain in this series, which is awesome. I mean, that's what we want. It's not awesome that Frederick was getting choked out, but as somebody that follows hockey, you want the heroes and villains. You want the people crossing the line. Villains. You want the passion, the hate on the ice. All that stuff seems like it's starting to happen in this series. And as a hockey fan, that's really all you can ask for.
What made the Vancouver series so great? Guys like Aaron Burroughs, the villains on the other side.
Fighting Patrice Bergeron. Nobody will ever forgive him for that.
You loved all of it. The hatred matters, and you got to build it up in the playoffs. But we did allude to changes. Let's talk about, you need a change in attitude. You need all of a sudden to snap into playoff mode, which again, they admitted in game one they were oddly. Don't expect that from a group that's kind of has a veteran presence and the grown-ups in the room. Obviously, Bergeron not being there hurts. Yep. But having Marchand flat out say, we played a little nervous, didn't expect that necessarily, but you do have to take it into consideration. There's not a lot of big-time playoff experience among some of the key members of this team. You take it for granted because you're used to seeing it with Krejci and Marchand and Bergeron. That's one. Attitude is one. But the other, as we said, Jim Montgomery promised that he would at least consider some changes. Grzelcyk being one. Before we get to the lineup, is there a thought in which you rotate out your Vezina favorite goaltender in favor of Jeremy Swayman, which is a rotation they employed to keep them fresh throughout the year? But there's no question that the last third of the season, maybe even longer, Swayman was every bit the equal Ullmark is. I don't want this to turn into Tuukka sucks, get the other guy in, which is a natural reaction every time something happens. But it was odd to see Ullmark give again and again, whether or not you buy all of the metrics, everybody looks at them differently. Minus 1.63 goals saved above expected last night. Not something you see. 5 goals, not something you see. Getting beat from the perimeter, albeit through some screens, not something that you necessarily see. I saw him getting up a little slow after one goal. Now, we've talked about what they did in regards to Bergeron and the subterfuge around that injury. The Ullmark thing also smelled a teeny bit funny, that he was dealing with something and he managed something and it's nothing, or is it something? I have no idea if he's limited or not, but based on what you saw last game, whether it's something physical or just simply the rotation worked, why not stay with it? We have 2 number ones, let's treat it as such. Is it something you do? Would you actually remove a Vezina winning goaltender, which Ullmark will ultimately be, in favor of Swayman to mix things up in game 3?
I think it could get to that point if they feel...
Will they, right, is what I'm saying.
I'm going to answer the question. It could get to that point, I think, later in the series, if they feel like they need to change the sort of tenor of the series. It may get to that point later on if their backs are against the wall and they say, we're going to try to just change the tenor, change the momentum, whatever. I think they have full confidence in Swayman, and he may get the call in that kind of a situation. Or if Ullmark does give up a bunch of soft goals, shows that he needs to come out and Swayman needs to come in. I don't think game 2 was anything close to that. I think it was much more about his defenseman hanging him out to dry and the players in front of him hanging him out to dry with horrible turnovers and weird coverages where the defensemen were nowhere to be found in front of the net, 5-6 times there were Panthers guys in front of the Boston net all by themselves. The defensemen were nowhere to be found. There was just weird coverage stuff that you didn't see all year long.
The stall goal, they just entered the zone clean, and he just walked
There was
right
nobody
in.
in the picture. When you watch the video of him scoring, there was like nobody around.
No one. And it wasn't a turnover. They just entered the zone and nobody picked him up. He just walked in there on a very simple pass. He's just like, okay, dead to
Ullmark
rights.
Stopped a bunch of those chances. He made a bunch of fantastic saves given the situation and given what was going on. And, yes, he gave up a couple of long-range bombs to Brandon Montour, one of which was definitely screened. I don't think he saw it at all. The second one, it beat him. But I don't look at that performance and say, like, he's going to get lifted, he should get lifted, he will get lifted. I think under no circumstances would he, and I think Jim Montgomery already said he's going to start game 3, and I would have made that call as well.
He did, okay.
Jeremy Swayman, I would not put him in at this point. I don't think anything that I've seen says you need to make a goalie change. I do think, though, that's a card they could play later on in the series if they need to flip the momentum or if they really, decide that something like that is called for. I don't think they're going to hesitate at all to put Swayman in if they feel like it's called for in any way. And to your point about Ullmark, I do think that he got up awkwardly minutes before he left that game against Washington. I do think there's a little something going on there, but it didn't look to me last night like he was hurt in any way or hindered physically in any way. I just think he was more hurt by what he saw from Dmitry Orlov and Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm and Brandon Carlo and Derek Forbort and the rest of the D-men core.
Yeah. You guys made me sad. No, that makes sense. And it is a tough thing to do. It's just interesting because, it's such an ego thing, particularly in the playoffs when you have a clear-cut number one. And
well, they're definitely they're definitely in a different situation than they've been in years past. We're so used to the default of Tim Thomas is the number 1, they're not going with anybody else. Tuukka Rask is the number 1, they're not going with anybody else. It's not like that anymore. This is more of an Andy Moog, Reggie Lemelin situation where you could see them going back to these guys back and forth, toggling during the playoffs, depending on the circumstances and what is happening. I definitely think Bruins fans and media, everybody needs to sort of like recalibrate their thinking about the goaltending now, because it's not you just like are going with this guy balls to the wall and that's it. He's going to play the entire time. I think there's going to be back and forth if they have a long playoff run where both guys play.
I was a Reggie guy.
Yes.
I was. Dougie Keens is another one who'd come in there and spell you. But yes, absolutely. That is more their situation here. But as you said, Ullmark's back in 3. What about the lineup? Like, again, assuming in a no Patrice Bergeron universe, what are you doing here to mix things up? I mean, you did see Taylor Hall ended up scoring the goal. He was not particularly effective. That second line, which had been great with Bertuzzi playing alongside,
Krejci has not been good in the first 2 games at all.
Really poor. Krejci has been really, really, really not holding up his own. What do you do here to mix things up? What can you do? What might they do? And again, it's the difference with what would you and what will they? I know you could always look to bring somebody else in, but without Bergeron, you don't have much in there. You're not going to sit somebody. I don't know what your benefit from a Greer or a Lauko or something like that. I don't know where you're going to go here.
The argument for Greer would be that given the physical tenor of the series and the nastiness, he's going to bring a little bit more of that element, and you could bring him in if you really want to make a statement physically in Game 3. We don't see that as much in the Stanley Cup playoffs now as we did in years past, but that's certainly a possibility.
But you have Frederick, you have Foligno, you have Hathaway, you have guys that
correct. But Frederick's supposed to be your tough guy, and he was getting choked out at the bottom of a pile at the end of the third period. Granted, like that's a dirty play, that's underhanded, but like I don't think you ever also want to see your tough guys and put in that kind of a spot either. I think that's a consideration. Do I think Frederick's coming out or Greer is coming in? Probably not. Lauko, I think, is a guy that would add speed for sure against a Panthers team that's attacked them with a lot of speed, and I think that is also an option and something you could look at. Because like Foligno's been okay, but like he missed a long period of time before he came in.
He's just back. He's back, and he had the stomach bug, so he battled the injury. In his first game back, he's also puking his guts out hours prior to the game, where he's just not feeling right. He just mentioned he's starting to feel a little better physically, but he's also rusty.
I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that he stays in the lineup. I think certainly he could come out for one of those guys. But until Bergeron comes back, I think you're very limited as to what kind of changes you can make. The one thing I look at and I would do if I were them, and it's not a line change, it's a special teams change, is I would think about putting Charlie Coyle as the bumper guy on the first power play instead of Jake DeBrusk and these other players that they're using. I think he's been good in these first two games. He was, I thought, a beast in game one. Strong, fast, looked like 2019 Charlie Coyle in the playoffs when he was a load to handle for other teams. And I think just he's a veteran guy that he handles the playoffs well. I think he would be a good guy to put in that spot in the bumper on the top power play unit, maybe instead of DeBrusk and some of these other guys that they're rolling out there. But until Bergeron, I suppose if you really want to throw everything out the window, you could talk about or think about putting Krejci with DeBrusk and Marchand in Bergeron's spot. When in past years when he got put in, and even when he was, a couple of years ago when Bergeron was hurt and he got put in between Pastrnak and Marchand, he was phenomenal.
So that's where I was leaning.
I think all of that stuff should be considerations and should be things that they think about doing, especially if they're desperate to get a spark and to get things going. And maybe that's something that Montgomery will have in his back pocket as Game 3 is going on if he needs it. But my sense would be, and what I think they should do, is essentially roll with the forwards that they have. Maybe you take out Foligno, you put Greer in, something like that. Nothing major, nothing seismic to change if Bergeron is out. And then if things continue to not go well in Game 3, then maybe you start to shake things up a little bit and change it up. But I think there's a real danger if you're the Boston Bruins right now of being too reactive to one game and too reactive to what happened in Game 2 and really switch things up. I mean, the forwards were not the bigger issue in my mind. The only thing that the only problem that they had, the only issue I saw with the forwards that needs to change, and this is part of playoff intensity, playoff level hockey, is not getting close enough to the net with their bodies, not getting close enough to the net with pucks, not getting traffic in front of Alex Lyon, who has shown that he's going to be able to be beaten if you can get good chances on him. Like that part of the playoff intensity, that's another part that they haven't ratcheted up to the highest level that they need to go yet, where clearly the Panthers have. They have all kinds of chaos and traffic in front of Linus Ullmark at all times. And I think that's one thing that they need to improve on and they need to get way better at. And that's an argument, I guess, for Foligno staying in because he's that kind of a net front guy. But that's the only gripe I have with them. I think the much bigger issue in this series to date has been the defenseman, and that's the biggest area that they need to make changes and that they need to make adjustments. And that's why you argue for Grzelcyk coming in. And I think he could. It's such a logical thing to watch what the problem is, see that he hasn't played, and realize that he could have an impact. And that's why I think he ends up going in. But the rest of it, I think you stay the course with the forwards and you have faith with the guys that got you there until Bergeron can come back.
It was logical after game 1 too, so I am slightly surprised they didn't go there because that was a problem and they got away with it, and then they got burnt. So yeah, I would agree. I was thinking exactly that, the Krejci thing with Marchand Pastrnak and going with.
Well, if they get desperate, they might hit the big red button and put together the perfection line with Krejci.
Bertuzzi Hall, Zacha on line 2. Yeah, and I was thinking that that's a possibility, but we'll see. Ultimately, you just want to kind of see all of those guys show up and do some of those things and just kind of like have that bell go off almost. Like, we're in the playoffs. Like, let's start playing like it. And I think that's something that they got to do. So here we are, 1-1, heading into Game 3. Joe Haggerty will be traveling down to Florida to cover the game. You can catch all of his written stuff, obviously, over at Boston Hockey Now. Make sure you stay here with CLNS Media as well for video post-game wrap-ups and post-game coverage from Joe, as well as a live post-game show immediately after the game. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Bruins Ringside. Turn on those notifications. You get notified every time a new video comes across or when we go live. And, of course, again, last shout-out to our sponsor, FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/Boston, exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network. Cash in on your $200 in bonus bets when you deposit 10 and bet 5. Again, FanDuel.com/Boston. Make sure to take advantage of this offer. This has been Pucks with Haggs. It's back. Back, baby. Love it. Pucks with Haggs is back. You can get it wherever all podcasts are available, Apple, Spotify. So make sure you subscribe, tell your friends about it. And honestly, please Rate and review is super important to us. So if you did like this podcast, please make sure you give us a rating and review it. Joe will be back with more podcasts as the series and hopefully the playoffs progress deep into the month of May and possibly June as well. So make sure you check it out. The best hockey coverage is yet to come. Thanks for listening this episode. Joe Haggerty, John Zannis. We'll see you guys later.